So Kundalini, through the process of awakening, which awakens to itself, according, if we are to use the proper language of the Tantras, it's not awakens in the individual for the individual's sake, as often mistakenly spoken in our day and age. It's an oxymoron in a way. It's not that it's power of individuation that checks my individuality, awakens in me. It's the other way around. It's I'm awakening from the imposition that consciousness throws itself upon itself, where it begins to consider itself to be this so and so, this individual limited being. All my energies began to be converted inwardly. So there is propensity for silence, to internalize, less socializing. It was kind of progressively setting on, but then went increasingly kind of in the way that just prior to that, what I was describing a moment ago, which culminated in that, what I speak with reference to transformation of consciousness, which I understand now there is no way for it to happen if we are to speak about the anatomy of that spiritual process, the anatomy, let's say, of what is going on, and what we refer to as realignment, is because all these pranic forces, right, this chi, these pranic forces, with 5 principles which conduct all affairs in this house, we call the body, mind, they beget to get converted. And unless they are converted, unless they are internalized, the possibility for awakening of that life force is not there. Yes, there can be forceful awakenings, forceful, let's say, in a manner of increased pressure during the childbirth when a woman undergoes, increased trauma, like, let's say, trauma of losing someone very dear in perhaps unprecedented, unexpected circumstances, right? Increased suffering of one sort or another. This could all prompt to the combustion of that, what we speak of as these pranic forces. But this is not the awakening in a true spiritual sense, you see, and we need to distinguish that. Anytime Kundalini is forcefully awakened, not consciously, forcefully. In other words, Kundalini can be awakened and has been awakened repeatedly, forcefully through conscious means, as yogic, let's say, lore tells us. Yogic path, not yogic in the sense of how it is spoken today in the West, but yogic in the sense of more traditional understanding, that was utilizing that forceful manner of forcing these pranic currents into the gut, where usually there's a conglomerate of all these pathways of energy, more rarely at the heart, so that the main currents, the ascending and descending breath, can equalize. And if this is in the gut, accompanied by the force responsible for metabolic activity, samana prana, else known as samana vayu, it's a fiery quality of prana. So when the ascending and descending pranas meet in the gut, then that causes that fiery element to explode, rushing down to the seat of awareness, as the Kundalini is referred to, in the Muladhara, in the base chakra, where it, as it were, facilitates the profound ignition, where that force, which prior to that was in a state of homeostasis, is, effectively speaking, wakes up from that slumber. And when it's done in a forceful manner, as is done consciously by yogis, hopefully it is accompanied by tremendous knowledge and understanding and guidance. And one would still need to ride these very powerful waves. When it happens, let's say, in any other way, like let's say in my case, it happened due to that of the progressive internalization, where let's say there was a sum total of this realignment where it was psychological above all else, right? It was very possibly linked to the neurophysiological functioning of all the systems of the system, because I was already doing yoga prior to that. I was already quite, and I would say an accomplished yoga teacher since like years before that, right? I was interested in yoga since mid-90s, since it kind of came to England full blast. But by my mid-30s, when it happened, I still had to go through a lot of that psychological first uncertainty, a lot through neurophysiological, I would say, discomfort. I could say pain, but it's not pain in a sense like I could put my finger where it is aching. No, I was in my plum. I was in my, I would say, I was like an athlete in every sense of that term. So it's not like my body was not prepared, like it happens to a lot of people. And then there's a tremendous assault on the system, on the endocrine system above all else. But the discomfort I'm speaking about here it's a combination of that psychological discomfort of parting with that sense of who one consider oneself to be, which is never easy, because this realignment pulls the rug beneath our feet. It makes us feel, at least in the ensuing phases, and they could be prolonged ones. You mentioned the power of now. Before Eckhart Tolle sat to write this book, we know that he sat for 2 years on a bench in Oxford, not knowing what he will be doing for the rest of his life. He went through this awakening. His awakening was prompted by deep depression, according to his line of story, right? He was suffering from depression all his life, and there he was as a student in England, German student in England, right? He went through that profound process, and for 2 years he was just like vegetating on a bench, not knowing what he'll be doing, you see? So he may not have emphasized the psychological turmoil. Maybe in his case, it was not a turmoil at all. It maybe have been a place of complete void-like state, free of worry, free of concerns. But I'm working with people now for many, many years, and it's not a homogeneous process. You see, we can spend a week in a state of complete and utter felicity and beatitude, in a state when nothing matters. But then comes a day when we smell the coffee, we look at the bills that arrive, we look at the situation in our relationships, and the whole thing looks different on that day. So we have to summon up the courage, resolve, right? And get on with what needs to be faced here. So it's not an easy affair. Awakening in the Western Hemisphere, awakening in the Western world today, in our globalized world, is not awakening some even 60 to 100 years ago in the ashram, where climate is compatible with this kind of thing. When the body doesn't need much, a bowl of rice, a bit of dal, right? You're doing your stuff, you're somewhere where you're taken care of, you don't need to worry. This is a far, far fetched reality. Some kind of like, as you can hear, layering adding additional layers here. So it was not at all a smooth process. It was accompanied by demanding phase, and this is what I often speak of, what makes the difference between true Kundalini awakening and the activation of pranic force, which has another Sanskrit name for it, pranotana. When pranotana effectively kicks in, then the display may be very similar to Kundalini, as in most cases it is, but there is no remaking of an individual. In other words, it is not accompanied by that free fall into the abyss. Because during the pranotana, the unplugging, now we're switching to a more clinical language of neuroscience, the unplugging of cortexes, neurocortexes in the brain, is never nearly as dramatic as in the process of fully blown Kundalini awakening. In pranotana is usually body, in a sense, as all-encompassing, using this in all-encompassing terms, not body as pound of flesh, not body as just this, right? Let's give it a bit of a raise the plank. We use the body, how it is referred to in Eastern culture, right? The body means here subtle body, causal body, right? The body, so made of these layers, progressively subtle layers. So the activation of pranic currents, that pranotana process, usually initiated by deep need for healing from some accumulated stresses, traumas, deep-seating conditionings that prevents one from enjoying life, as simple as that. Whereas Kundalini is another animal altogether, to put it this way. Kundalini process is a remaking of an individual into universal awareness. So this is why some spiritual platforms, some philosophies can be very handy to understand this, so as to separate wheat from the chaff, and so that when we speak about Kundalini, we can speak about it from the platform which operates with a sophisticated knowledge and understanding of what Kundalini actually is. Because in our day and age, everything goes under that, unfortunately. And very often, any kind of pranic activity in the body, any kind of movements, any kind of shakes, any kind of somatic activity is immediately ascribed to Kundalini awakening, which it is not. And we know that. So Kundalini is something which guards our individuality. Even Carl Jung, who wasn't an initiated tantrika, but drew richly from the knowledge of tantras, right, to give us I would say, an extraordinary, for his time, even for our time, perspectives on human psyche. Drew richly from that, from Indian culture in particular. We know that, it's a fact. Even though he did not go through the initiation, let alone Kundalini process, in any remotest manner, but in his historical lectures, which he delivered in Zurich in 1933, I believe, he spoke about Kundalini as the power behind individuation. And that was a revolutionary achievement, I would say, in the domain of Western thought, in terms of understanding of what Kundalini process and what Kundalini is. So his seminars on Kundalini are a laudable achievement in the course of psychological thought, as that, let's say, transitional phase from religious indoctrination, of accepting religious, let's say, creed of how it sees this, into the time we find ourselves now. This was tremendously helpful. So that if the Kundalini is the power responsible for individuation, then it is the Kundalini likewise here, obviously, is that what keeps in check that very, very system of identity, structure of identity. So Kundalini, through the process of awakening, which awakens to itself, according, if we are to use the proper language of the Tantras, it's not awakens in the individual for the individual's sake, as often mistakenly spoken in our day and age. It's an oxymoron in a way. It's not that it's power of individuation that checks my individuality, awakens in me. It's the other way around. It's I'm awakening from the imposition that consciousness throws itself upon itself, where it begins to consider itself to be this so and so, this individual limited being. So the Kundalini is a very, very different affair. It's a lifetime affair. It's a complete and utter, it's not an upgrade of the system into the higher operating system, even though if we sometimes maybe, when we lower the plank, when we kind of give it a concessional language, we can speak about that. No, it's discarding the system altogether and realizing that it needs to have completely and utterly different modus operandi. So, and of course, it is accompanied throughout these phases it's known for. This is what I'm working on right now as we're preparing this major book to publication in the coming year, hopefully in spring, where all this, separating wheat from the chaff is the high time, so there's this clarity at least, and the perspective chosen to give the overview of the Kundalini both as a symbol, cultural, historical, spiritual symbol, and Kundalini as a process, both classical, or from both classical and clinical perspectives. Because there's already enough information in the West and around the world in terms of the clinical accounts of the display of the true Kundalini process.